Banji Vakorja. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Fireside Chat with Eimear. And this is Fireside Chat 132, brought to you by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And as is customary, I begin each chat with a prayer for peace. Gomara Shiakon Fudna Krinya. Gomara Shiakon in our Jaili agus in our Jirha. Gunari Lin, Lenar Kujgarmaka, Gaumich Boykas Jeev, Jeh Chivdaka, is Spirit Chivdaka. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities. For peace, as the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their dreams the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the holy mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue. So this is a recording of this Fireside Chat because I'm taking a break during this festive season. And also I'm moving away from my normal format in that I don't have a guest, it's just me. So I hope you can bear with me. So this is a time for many, it's celebrating Christmas or Yule, or we've just passed the solstice. And I know in Ireland, whether you practice or you're a Christian or not, Christmas is here. It's hard to avoid. But this is the time where we wish merriment, happiness, joy on people, and peace. You know, peace on earth, goodwill to all beings, etc. And yet at the moment, the world is racked and countries are racked with war, genocide, trauma, horror, grief, pain. And it seems to be never ending. And I think at times like this, it can be tempting to fall into a sense of helplessness or powerlessness, hopelessness. And yet, it's important that we stand our ground. And as Druids, standing our ground in the center of peace. We begin and end our ceremonies with peace. And we also have a beautiful prayer for peace that I'll recite. I've translated it into Irish, so bear with me and I'll say it in Irish first and then I will say it in English. Godawan, lasje de gri hocker maveha govoy me shiakoin. Gotostok, lasje de cunas and wall go rinny me shiakoin. Gamonla, lasje de kirkle eantok na denaka gagawi me shiakoin. Deep within the still center of my being, may I find peace. Silently within the quiet of the grove, may I share peace. Gently within the greater circle of humankind, may I radiate peace. This is a prayer that I say every day. I find great comfort because I know even if I can't deal with what's going out there in the outer world, at least if I can focus on finding peace within my own being. I'm not suggesting that's easy for any minute, it isn't. But it reminds me that peace starts within the center of all of us. And if we can focus on that, maybe that can radiate out to bring peace to the rest of the world. Maybe I'm idealistic, but I still need to hold on to that ideal. So, like I say, I don't have a guest, but I'm going to tell you a story. I first heard this story told by an amazing woman called Breezy Kelly. She's a woman from Donegal, and she goes around Ireland baking bread for peace. And I met her, I was at the Glen Storytelling Festival in County Antrim in October, and I was staying with Liz Weir, who is an international storyteller from up there, and she has a storytelling centre called the Ballyamon Barn in Ballyamon in Armagh, or in Antrim. So we were staying there, and that's where I met Breezy. And we sat in Liz Weir's kitchen as Breezy baked bread and regaled us with stories of her mother and how she baked bread, how she taught her. And as she's baking the bread and we're sitting around the table watching and listening to her, she's reciting poetry for peace, she's telling stories, she's singing songs. Just an amazing experience. And there was one story that really, really resonated with me that she told. And I'd like to tell this story. Now, it's my version of it. It's a story, it's not an Irish story. It is an Ndebele story from Zimbabwe. Here goes. There was a young man, a beautiful, handsome young man, and he'd just gotten married to the most beautiful woman he had ever met. And he was so in love with her. He did everything he could to please her. He'd bring her flowers every day that he had picked in the forest. He'd fetch water for her. He'd fetch firewood. He'd bring her tea in the morning. He thought, all his dreams had come true. And she was a beautiful wife too. And they were both very, very much in love. And she had a blind brother. And to please his wife even more, he invited his blind brother-in-law to go hunting with him. And the blind man said, "Oh, I've never been hunting because I'm blind. I can't do this. But if you lead me, because I don't know the forest, I'm happy to go with you." So the next day, the two men set off. Now, in the village, the blind man was well able to navigate his way. He could avoid these rocks and these tree stumps, and he didn't fall into the well, and he could manage because he knew the land so well. But when they came to the edge of the forest, he held on to the elbow of the young man. And as they stepped into the forest, well, a whole world of wonder opened itself up to the blind man. He could feel the earth energy beneath his feet coming right up through the soles of his feet, right up into his body. And as he turned his face skyward, he could feel the sky energy coming down through from the canopy of the trees down through the top of his head, filling his very being. And he could hear the wind blowing gently through the trees and hearing the leaves whisper to each other. And he could hear the insects as they crawled up and down the trees. And he could smell the smells of the various trees. He could distinguish one tree from another. And he said, "Oh, there's a fox over there. She's feeding her young. Oh, and now they're playing. And there's a bird about to take flight. I can feel her ruffling her feathers." And the young man said, "How can you know all this? You who live in a world of darkness because you are blind." And the blind man said, "I have a fire within my heart. It brightens everything for me, and it brightens and hones my senses, so I'm aware of everything and how connected everything is in the world around me." And the young man was so impressed with the wisdom and the knowledge of his blind brother-in-law. And he, despite his youth and his sight, wasn't aware of any of these things. And he was just focused on finding the right place where they could lay their traps. And they continued walking through the forest with the blind man holding on to the elbow of the young man. And eventually they came to a little stream in the forest. And this was a good place to lay their traps. And the young man, he taught the blind man how to set the trap, which he did. And then he went a little bit upriver himself and laid his own trap. But this time, he disguised the trap. He put a camouflage so the birds wouldn't recognize the trap. Now, he was so excited to get back to his new, beautiful young wife. He didn't teach the blind man how to camouflage and hide his trap. And he thought, well, he won't know any different anyway. And I want to get back to my wife. So they headed back together again with the blind man holding onto the elbow of the young man, back through the forest, and then they went back to their respective houses. And the next day they met again, with the blind man well able to walk through the little streets and areas of his village. And when they came to the edge of the forest, he held on to the elbow of his young brother-in-law. And again, he re-experienced the wonder of the forest, even hearing more, listening to the communication between the trees and the insects and the birds, enjoying the smells and the tastes of the forest, feeling the earth energy come up through his body and the sky energy come down through his head. And they're walking away, walking along the path, and the blind man says, "Oh, we've got birds. We've managed to get birds. They're in the traps." And they weren't even near where they'd laid the traps. And the young man says, "How can you know this? How can you know this? You live in a world of darkness." He said, "No, I can hear them. I can hear them. We got a bird each." And eventually they arrived at the place where they'd laid the traps. And the young man went up to where he had his, and he took away all the camouflage. And sure enough, in the trap was a little brown bird. And he picked up the bird and he put it in his hunting bag. And then he went over to where his brother-in-law was. And there in that trap, that was there for everybody to see and every bird to see, was the most beautiful bird he had ever laid eyes on. This bird was multicolored. It had all the colors of the rainbow. It was an exquisite bird. He began to feel a little jealousy and a bit resentful. Why? How come my blind brother-in-law could catch a bird like this when his trap wasn't even hidden? And he thought, "Oh, wouldn't my wife love those feathers? And she could make a beautiful hat for herself with those exquisite colors. Well, my brother-in-law, his wife will want them too." And he thought, he picked up the bird and said, "Yes, you've got a bird." Put it in his bag, picked up the little brown bird, said, "Here is your bird," to the blind man. And the blind man took the bird in his hand and he rubbed his head and the beak and rubbed his hand down along the feathers, down the back of the bird and the wings. And he said nothing. And the young man said, you can put that in your hunting bag now." So the blind man took the little brown bird, put it in his hunting bag. And then they picked up their traps and they began to head back along the forest path, back home. But on the way, they stopped for a rest and they sat on a log. And they were, each of them, not saying a word, quiet, just staying with their own thoughts. And after a while, the young man said to the blind man, he said, "Brother-in-law, you are such a wise and knowledgeable man. Maybe you can answer this question for me. It's a question that has bothered me for a long, long time." And the blind man said, "Okay, ask away." And he said to him, "Why is it that people fight?" And the blind man was very, very quiet. And he seemed to be silent for a long time. It was almost like he'd forgotten the question. And then he raises his head and he looks directly at the young man. It's as if he could see into his very soul. And he said, "People fight because they do what you have done to me." And with that, the young man was so embarrassed, so ashamed at what he had done to his brother-in-law. And he said, "I am so sorry. I wronged you. It's just that those beautiful feathers, I thought I'd please my wife and she could make a beautiful hat and she would love me even more. And I underestimated you. I thought you wouldn't notice how wrong I've been to have cheated you like that. And I really, really apologize." And with that, he took the colourful bird out of his own bag and he handed it to the blind man, who took it. And he rubbed his hand on the bird's head and on his beak, down along his back and on the wings. And he took another look at the young man, again as if he could see into his soul, and he said, "Thank you." And he put it in his bag and he took out the little brown bird and he gave it to the young man. And then they were silent again, each with their own thoughts. And then after a while, the young man raised his head and the blind man said, "Do you have another question for me?" And he said, "I do. How do people become friends again after they fought?" And the blind man thought for a few moments, and then he looked his brother-in-law as if he could see right into his very soul, and he said, "They become friends again when they do what you have just done." So I hope you've enjoyed that story. How simple it is, and yet if we can start from ourselves, taking responsibility for our own actions and the own peace between our own, within our own hearts, maybe we can share that with others. So, Gomara Siakon a suivness, Orif Galer, agus ar fud an down, the Gá Filas a Fehed Cahar. Aflin fi washe, Chief Galern. Happy New Year to all of you. And may peace and serenity be with you all and all over the world for 2024. So I look forward to seeing you soon for another Fireside Chat. In the meantime, be well, be peaceful, and slán.